Hello, this is Cody Carlson doing my case study for EDL 853. Brief summary of what's going on. Carl Hughes is a third grader at Schuyler School, which is K through 12 in the Fulton School District. He is in Mrs. Taylor's class. The school district's made up of 16 total schools across 800 miles, so the school district's resources are quite limited. Carl is on IEP for his behavior disorder, which he's been diagnosed with for a while, but recently he's been acting out more physically. Mrs. Taylor's worried for her safety. She feels like her classroom's not a safe learning environment anymore when Carl has these outbursts. So she contacts Susan Green, first year special education teacher, and she wants Carl removed from her class for the betterment of the whole learning environment. But Susan is trying to do her best to keep Carl in the regular classroom, as he does not have any problems with intellectual functioning. Category 1, problem identification and analysis. First, we got to start off with what do we know? We know that Schuyler School, like I said, is a K through 12. It is part of the Fulton School District, which is made of 16 schools. It's covering 800 miles. It's only got one superintendent because of all the low resources, and that superintendent only spends 1 day per week at each school because there's only one of them and it's so far away. So every township has an assistant superintendent. That's a teacher that just kind of does an extra duty. Also, the school district formed a cooperative sharing resources services, so special education services are lacking as well. We talked about Susan Green. She's a first-year special education teacher at Schuyler School. She replaced Mrs. Lewis, the longtime teacher there for over 25 years. We know Susan's having some difficulty adjusting to the lack of resources in a different situation, that is Schuyler School. There is Mrs. Nancy Taylor. That is the third grade teacher. She has 10 years of experience. Her perception is she's a pretty good teacher. We know that she finds Carl to be threatening to herself and her students. Going over the Hughes family, there's Carl, who's a third grader. He's actually larger than the average third grader. He's a big man in stature for his age. He was diagnosed with a behavior disorder, but for the most time it's mostly been self-abusive, but recently it's become physically threatening. Last year, as a second grader, he had a behavior management plan that was just rewards and consequences, but he has become apathetic with his behavior into schoolwork, and that behavior plan is not working too well anymore. His parents just recently got divorced. They are awarded joint custody, but in looking at the file, with the divorce proceedings, required police intervention more than once at the home, so home life's probably not great. Mrs. Hughes works more than 50 hours a week now, so she's rarely home, and Mr. Hughes is not involved. He doesn't want to be involved in this family anymore. They have two older children that are both in the junior high, and they're both receiving services right now for emotional problems. The older brother is on Ritalin. What do we need to know? First, as the principal, I would see who Carl's teacher was last year, see if they had any of the same issues with Carl, and if they had any strategies that worked to get Carl to stay away from those behaviors. Also, I want to know how, since we're only 10 weeks into school, how does Carl act outside of school? How was he this summer? Was he starting this phase then, or is it just a school thing? Has he been aggressive to other students at any other time, or is it just with Mrs. Taylor? What about, is there anyone in the school that has a positive relationship with Carl? Does he have any friends? Does he have a favorite teacher? Does he work better with male or female teachers? Just knowing those would be helpful. And then also I'd like to know what Mrs. Taylor's past experience with students with IEPs is. It seems like she always depended on Mrs. Lewis to just remove the students for her. And is she following Carl's IEP appropriately? Now to identify the problem. There's a few sub-problems, but there's one major one. Some subs is Mrs. Taylor wants Carl out of his class for good. She feels that it's an unsafe learning environment, so she just wants Carl removed. But Susan Green is trying to keep Carl as inclusive as possible. I mean, his intellectual functioning shows that he belongs in a general ed classroom. But the main problem is, how do we improve Carl's behavior? It seems all the adults in his life are just too busy with their own issues, and he's never had any adult teaching. But Carl's behavior is disrupting the learning environment, so something's got to change. And then a sub problem here with Susan coming along, we are fighting the old-fashioned fight of, well, we've always done things this way in the past, and it's worked out for us. Mrs. Lewis would take students out of the regular ed classes and put them in the detention room with the workbook rather than helping them or helping the teacher actually teach them. So Mrs. Taylor's used to that and still wants that type of response from her special ed department. Now we get into category 2, my proposed plan of action. Firstly, as the male in the building, I'm going to become more personally involved with Carl and see if we can have a relationship and if I can be a mentor for him. It seems he needs a male figure in the school setting, and as the principal and the leader, I feel like that's my duty. I'm an advocate for Carl to get the support he needs, but I'm still going to hold him accountable, and I feel like that's a big thing that he hasn't had in his life, is no one's really held him accountable. I'm going to involve Carl in the new behavior plan and see if we can find rewards and punishments that motivate him to get him out of this apathetic mood. With that, being more involved with Carl, I'm going to be more visible and present in Miss Taylor's class. I'm going to get a few things done with that. I'm going to be able to observe Mrs. Taylor to see if she's complying with Carl's IEP, and then I'm going to also be able to observe Carl's behavior in class. I feel like this situation's best handled with my own eyes and being able to be involved in the situation. Also, I'm going to help Susan Green. I feel like even though she's a first-year teacher, she's doing a great job, and she genuinely cares for our students. So I'm going to give her support and make it known that to all the other teachers that the expectation is that we help these students as much as we can. Also, with that, I'm going to help them. I'm going to provide resources for the whole school. We're going to have some professional development days where I'm going to give resources to all the general education teachers, focusing on inclusion with our new goal. And I'm just going to teach them strategies of how to teach students with IEPs and how to function with that. Getting into category 3, resolving the issues based on promoting the success of all students. Throughout my entire decision-making process in this case study, I was always thinking with the idea of promoting academic success and personal well-being of every student. We got to improve Carl's behavior. That's going to help everybody. I think there's a direct correlation between his behavior improving and the learning environment of Mrs. Taylor's class improving. If he can provide, if he can't stop, then there's still going to be an unsafe learning environment, and nobody can be successful in that. I'm going to, when helping Susan Green fight for inclusion, having a teacher that now advocates for our special education students is huge. Inclusive classrooms provide growth for all students. And then school-wide resources, I'm providing them, our teachers, with resources so that they can become better teachers. Category 4, reflection. I thought that Mrs. Taylor lacked experience with providing appropriate accommodations of students with IEPs. It seemed to me that she always depended on Mrs. Lewis to remove them from her class instead. With Carl, I feel like the divorce was not the sole reason why he's acting the way he is. I feel like it's just a buildup of years of neglect and just his home life that's all he's seen for his entire life, is his parents arguing and acting like that, and he's just following in those footsteps, which most younger students do. And then I thought our special education department before Susan Green, when Mrs. Lewis was in charge, did a poor effort of meeting student needs. There was no inclusion, but I understand the issue of, with rural areas such as that school district, it may be hard to retain staff, and that sadly potentially leads to having poor educational practices that you don't want to accept, but you won't be able to fill that spot, and that's kind of a hard problem to have as an administrator. Going on with reflection, I felt remorse for Carl since he lacked an adult who would advocate for him. No one's really provided him some support to be successful. I was really ashamed and angry of Mrs. Taylor, how she acted in the IEP, how she just started in the meeting blurting out these lies and a narrative that's trying to make her look like a good person of, oh, your kid's so wonderful, but I just don't have the resources to give him what he needs. He needs to be out of my class. Well, in reality, that's lying to me. I was very upset about that. I do feel that Susan has the best interest of our students in mind. She's very genuine, and she wants every student to be successful. I also valued Susan's courage to stand up to the people like Mrs. Taylor of saying, well, we've always done it this way. Sometimes as a first-year teacher, it's difficult to stand up to veteran teachers like that. Throughout my entire decision-making, I valued what was best for all students. I felt like inclusion was that. And I also valued the assistant superintendent of Schuyler School giving up their time and taking on the extra responsibility. Debriefing with unresolved issues will be interesting. Does Carl's mom take them to the doctor to get a prescription like his older brother? Does the new behavior plan motivate Carl at all to improve his behavior? Does the relationship between Mr. and Mrs. Hughes become civil, or did the cops continue to get involved and have that bad role model in his life? Does Mrs. Taylor provide the appropriate support in accordance to Carl's IEP? I don't know if she follows it or not. It'd be interesting to have further investigation with that. Category 5, reflection of Standard 2. Reflecting on the actions as the building administrator, I promoted the academic success of every student by 1, keeping Carl in the classroom as much as possible. Inclusion, as we said, was going to promote success of every student. I was able to mediate between 2 staff members for the betterment of the learning environment. I took an invested interest personally in a struggling student, provided guidance, and was a role model for them. And I supported a new teacher in her challenges of doing what is right for our students, while following district and national policies in all situations. Reflecting on the actions as the building administrator, I promoted the personal well-being of every student by supporting the new behavior plan that removes Carl if he becomes a threat to student safety. If he continues to act the way he is and becomes physically threatening, well, that is not a safe learning environment anymore for our students, and that cannot be accepted. I've also provided training to staff members to be better prepared for these special education students in the classroom that should provide better instruction. And also, being a larger male in stature at our school, I was able to provide my own supervision and services as an escort if Carl were to needed to be removed from the classroom. And then reflecting on the actions as the building administrator, I enhanced instructional capacity by those professional development days are great opportunities for teachers to collaborate on their best practices and strategies for their special education students. By keeping Carl in the classroom, his classmates will learn life lessons as well as how to be a role model and be accepting. Everybody has got some differences, but everybody has some value. And I think they learn those lessons by inclusion. And also by supporting Susan and holding the expectations of our teachers that they properly follow these student IEPs, that expectation will then raise and enhance instructional capacity as well. And that is my case study. Thank you very much. Have a good day.